Hello. So we are joined in conversation today by Kerry Sokalsky. Kerry is the president of PreSales Mastery. He has 20 years experience in enterprise pre-sales, and is also the co-author of the Pre-Sales Buyer Guide. So from the other side of the pond, Kerry, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, John and Isabel. Great to be here.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So, I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation today because, as you know, we normally speak with hiring managers, and obviously your perspective is different coming from the coaching side of things. So, all the same, we'll kick off with the same question that we always ask. So, what is it that you would say that you love, especially about pre-sales?
Well, I hope there's a lot that I love about it, having spent 20 years in the space. But I would say I joke with a lot of people that I have occupational ADD. I like to be working on lots of different things and like change what I'm working on, and that's what really appealed to me about pre-sales in general is that I started in an organization where pre-sales was exclusively a pre-sales function. We had no involvement post-sale. We were not a land and expand type of operation, and so we literally had no post-sale experience. And so when we were done with the deal and got that signature, I was off to the next one. And I liked that I could work on, five, six, seven deals at a time and learn about tons of different companies and tons of different industries with tons of different problems. So that to me, that's exciting, and that ultimately we're typically engaged with a lot of different clients who are doing a lot of different things.
It sounds super exciting, and I believe it is so good that you have so many insights about yourself, and you know what drives you and what motivates you during for your work. And if you are thinking from your point of view, what would be the two or three main characteristics that a pre-sales should have in order to be extraordinary, not just good?
Well, I think the first one is self-awareness. I think we need to understand what our strengths and weaknesses are. And, you know, being self-aware also means that you're probably, hopefully, open to feedback. And we should always be improving. I myself am always looking to improve. I sit on webinars from my peers and everybody else in the organization because I want to continue to improve, even though I give advice for my job. And so I think self-awareness is the first one. If you don't know where your blind spots are and you don't have a curiosity to get better, I think that you're going to become stale pretty quickly. So I think that would be one of the big ones. I think that you need to be creative. In sales in general, we need to be able to dance well. I always talk about the ability to dance because we never have all the answers. And so if you're not going to be able to be creative in coming up with responses that aren't necessarily not untrue, but are at least are creative in solving problems that you may not have 100% of the information for, you may not be as effective as you'd otherwise be. And so creativity, I think, is the second one. And then if we're looking for a third, I would probably say the ability to have a thick skin, because pre-sales is sales, or at least in my opinion, it should be. And most organizations don't win the majority of the time. You've got to be able to roll with the losses, learn from them, and then move on.
This is so insightful, Kerry, and thank you so much. And it seems like you are already pretty high on personal growth initiatives. So, do you have any tips for the candidates if they are in the hiring process? Like, how could, let's say they have these qualities, how could they display them?
Well, it's a great question. I think, the one thing we talk about a lot in sort of demo execution is storytelling. We've got to be memorable. We've got to be unique, and telling stories evokes emotion, which people tend to remember a lot more than the content of what you're telling them. I think that same thing holds true when we're interviewing for jobs. If we can convey the stories and the experiences we've had in a more compelling way, we're going to be more memorable to that hiring manager. And it's going to let them know that we can do that same thing in front of our prospects. So I think being good at storytelling would definitely be the first one. The other thing I would say is treat your recruitment as a sales cycle, right? Treat that hiring manager or that company that you're approaching to be hired by as though they were a prospect. And how would you respond to them? Well, you'd be super timely in responding back to any requests. You would check in with them proactively beforehand to find out what they were looking for, what their expectations are, so that you're better prepared. Ask questions. Don't wait for the interview to come to you. Go to them. Follow up afterwards. Don't just wait for that phone call because you're one of a lot of names on their desk. Be proactive and stand out. So the same things that make us successful in the sales cycle, I think I would say try to apply in the recruitment cycle as well.
Yeah. I think that's such good advice, and it's actually a real benefit if you work in pre-sales, in the sense that you should have this experience built up over time in terms of how you operate within a sales cycle. And sometimes I think that people can fall into the trap of thinking, well, it's an interview process, and therefore my perception of an interview process is I'm kind of reactive to, they ask me to do something, I'll do it, I'll go in for an interview, I'll ask the questions that they answer me, and I'll ask them questions about the organization, rather than taking a bit more of control of it, which they may do, or you may do in the professional world, in a sales cycle, but you can apply exactly the same thing. And ultimately it's a lucky thing for people in pre-sales, because it means that you've got, if there are any, if an interview process doesn't, for example, cover discovery that well, you can show off your discovery skills, finding out about the role, for example, and so on. So I think that's really, really, really definitely good advice.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, John. Just to sort of interrupt, I want to add one more thing. So, I always did this. I hope most pre-sales hiring managers are doing this as well, is obviously engaging in a demo type interview with their sort of selected candidates. One of the things that I would do very consciously when I was putting candidates through that process is I would give them very limited information. Mm-hmm. And I would wait to see what type of initiative they would take in order to stand out. And it was really telling to see the difference between the folks that actually proactively reached out and said, are you looking for this? Can I have a chat with you about this? Can we get into character for 15 minutes beforehand? What else are you looking for? Versus the ones that just showed up to the interview and then decided, okay, what do you want me to do now? Get into character? Should we go? Let's go.
Yeah,
this is such an amazing advice, and it's like seeing whether they would push for a discovery call or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Super.
Yeah, because also it weeds out from a hiring manager's perspective as well. You may have somebody that's been, at a big tier 1 vendor for 15 years, and looks great on paper, but just feels that bit uncomfortable reaching out to the hiring manager because and it kind of, to an extent, that hunger should always be there, and sometimes it helps you kind of weed out those that may be a little bit more kind of just resting on their laurels, in terms of resting on their, and rather than having that kind of constant improvement and always saying, what can I do, that you were discussing before. So question for you. I understand pre-sales mastery is quite differentiated in the sense that you do one-on-one demo coaching, correct? So I imagine you've seen and analyzed and looked at a lot of demos, which is great. Yeah. So it would be great, whilst we have you, for you to perhaps expand on exactly how you operate in that respect.
Yeah, for sure. So, and thanks for the opportunity. So we basically do demo call coaching. So for those familiar with platforms like Gong and Chorus that basically record every call that goes out and then use AI to sort of coach at scale, that doesn't really work for pre-sales, because it's not just what's being said that's important when we're demoing, it's also what we're showing in conjunction with what we're saying. And so unfortunately, you need eyes on the problem. And so you can't really do call coaching for pre-sales without actually watching the game tape. And so that's what we do. Managers do not have time. There's been a lot of research out there. Corporate Executive Board did a study that said that 73% of managers spend less than 5% of their time on coaching, despite the fact that coaching is far and away the most effective way to upskill and enable people. And if you think about it, a typical manager has 5 to 10 people on their team. That's half a percent or 1% of their time that they're spending on coaching. So they just don't have the time to upskill their team through coaching. And so that's where we sort of come in. And the nice thing about coaching on demos that have been delivered is we're coaching on real world behavior. We're not doing some simulated exercise where an SE is presenting back to their manager or to us as third-party coaches, where how they behave in those simulated and hypothetical environments typically tends not to reflect how they behave in front of their prospects. And so this really gets them very pointed feedback around what they're doing in the sales cycle. The other thing that's really nice about it is people tend to be more receptive to feedback when they can see directly what they've done in conjunction with that feedback. When you give feedback after a demo, as someone that sat in on it, a lot of the time as an SE, we're in the mode, like we're in the zone, making sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's and covering everything we need to cover and focused on the audience. We may not remember everything we did. We may not even necessarily interpret how our manager gives us feedback as what we thought we did. But when we can actually see the game tape and watch what we did and see that next to the feedback, people are much more receptive to that feedback. So it's a really effective way to help skill people up. And then we basically measure them as well against the 100-point demo best practices scorecard, where we can provide really granular data on exactly how they're performing in their demos.
Amazing. Super, really, really, really tangible, no? And really kind of, roll your sleeves up and let's go through everything piece by piece. And that's great. Okay, so if you're a hiring manager, listen to this conversation, and it could be that you're either hiring proven professionals in the pre-sales realm, you could be hiring people from industry, and so you're looking for the right kind of underlying capabilities, but you're aware that you'll need to train up around skills, around demoing, for example. From your experience, what components of demo performance are kind of inherent, and we just have them and they're natural? And what are learned? So which can't be learned and which can be learned? Because if you're hiring, you need to be aware of that. If you can train someone up, that's great. But if you're training somebody up that's just it's difficult to train on those points, then it might kind of lead to a bit of frustration.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think it's pretty spot on. I would say that the one thing I evaluate, but I can't coach on, is enthusiasm and energy. Right? If you're not passionate about your product and your ability to solve your prospects' problems, then that's going to come across in the sales cycle. I had a recent client who had an extraordinarily passive tone and approach to demoing. They would sit back in their chair with their head on their hand, and they would talk really slowly about this. And I wanted to fall asleep watching it, and I wasn't the prospect. And my feedback to that person was, if you're not coming across with energy, not only are you going to lose your clients, but you're not convincing them of anything, even if they are continue to pay attention. And this individual had a really good response, which was, well, what do I do to fix this? And my answer was, look, you can't change who you are easily. This is ingrained in sort of your personality. And if you try and come across as this super high energy person, but that's not who you are, it will come across as manufactured and fake. And people will see through it. And so my advice in that case was, pick your moments. Pick a few of the points you absolutely want to emphasize during the demo, and change your behavior for just those points. And if it's only for a few moments in the demo, it's not going to make you seem fake. But what it will do as well is, because of the contrast to your other style, it will super emphasize those points, and that will help make those the points that the audience leaves that demo with. So that's the one thing I don't feel I can really change behavior on a lot, because it's part of people's personality at the end of the day. Almost anything else we can change if people are willing.
Yeah, I suppose that would be the other point as well, actually. One would be enthusiasm and energy, and the other would be your points at the beginning in terms of self-awareness and disposition towards kind of constant improvement. Because if that's not there, then it's going to be an uphill struggle the whole time.
And their company's wasting a lot of money with me.
Yeah. And with the hire.
Indeed.
And one question this. So when we're talking about the skills of demoing, so something I've personally always wanted to improve a lot is like storytelling, for example. I don't feel it's like a natural part of the way I've developed how I communicate, for example. And I assume other people are like that as well. So do you think that, for example, storytelling is a skill that can be developed over time?
Absolutely. And I think, if anything, storytelling is one of the easy skills to develop, because there's so many different avenues you can learn from it. Go watch a Disney or a Pixar movie, and you will learn the absolute ABCs of storytelling. And so I mean, to me, that's the nice thing, is that there are so many people out there that are great at storytelling. You don't need a pre-sales specific expert to teach you how to be effective at storytelling. Storytelling is not specific to pre-sales. And so that to me is one of the nice ones, because there's just so many different options out there to get better at it.
Yeah. And one more question, if I can. Sorry, Isabella, I'll pass over to you after this. So related to storytelling. So storytelling, it's like you've got the memorability factor and so on and so forth. In terms of like sense of humor and comedy, do you ever see that? And because I think sometimes a good sense of humor, especially in intense situations, can just cut through everything. Have you ever seen from all of these coaching sessions, have you seen people that are able to really bring some like good jokes into demos and stuff? And because it's not something that I've really heard of, but I could see working.
I've seen examples of it work well. I've also seen examples of it really backfire. I think it's a really fine line. I think comedy in general is a fine line, where there's a very small difference between you're brilliant and you're terrible. And I think that in a business context of a demo, you really have to pick your moments. And like anything else, delivery is more important than the content of a joke a lot of the times. I've seen people where they've tried to make a joke, it falls flat, and they just lose the audience for the rest of the demo. I've seen ones where it's actually picked the audience back up. And the nice thing about a joke too is it's unexpected. And so when you do interject some humor into it, you tend to recapture the audience's attention, which is always a good thing in almost all the remote demos that we're delivering today. So that's another nice thing about it, is it really is unexpected. So when it does hit, it makes you really memorable.
Yeah, but high risk.
High risk indeed, yeah.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. Good, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kerry. And one last question. We usually have a lot of coaching on demo, and of course, this is one of the most important part of the story. But what about discovery session? Do you have any specific ways through which you can help pre-sales to to gain that active listening skills, or to be able to really uncover the pain of the customer?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you mentioned active listening, and I'm gonna give a point that is one of the items on our scorecard is around active listening, and it's something I see people do demos a lot, and it's a cardinal sin, and I think it applies to discovery calls as well. In fact, it really applies to any time you're interacting with any prospect, or frankly any other person, and that is please, 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 please do not interject and interrupt someone when they're speaking. We have a tendency in pre-sales, we're very smart people for the most part. It's why we have the job, which is awesome. We tend to know what people are going to ask. We also tend to know the answer ahead of time, right? We can perceive where they're going to go. We can intuit what they're going to ask, and we immediately want to give them the answer because we're enthusiastic about our products, which is a good thing, but it's the wrong way to execute. And so when I talk about interjections, I'm talking about things like when someone is speaking, saying, yeah, I get that, I hear you, understand, yeah, while they're speaking. And it's usually it's sort of a speech habit that people do. They're not even really thinking about it a lot of the time. The problem is it's distracting. And when it's perpetual, it can actually become really annoying, where people just want you to shut up and listen. The interruptions are worse, though, because when you interrupt somebody, a couple of things are happening. One is you're interrupting them, and people can usually forgive that the first time, especially if you actually knew what they were going to ask and answer the question, fine. But if you do it repeatedly, it's going to be perceived as rude. And you immediately lose credibility with someone when they think you're being rude. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, sometimes we don't know what they're going to ask. And even if we do, they may add additional information, or we're about to add additional information or nuance to whatever they're going to ask or say that now we're going to miss out on. And in my experience in watching and delivering myself lots of demos, when you interrupt someone, they don't then add in later what they were going to say when you interrupted them. Yeah. They stop talking about it. You've lost that additional information that might have been forthcoming. And so it's really important that we're listening, because we want to make sure we're getting all the information possible. And so to me, those are the sort of the two big things, right? Is make sure that you're not being rude. You're actually, being a professionally, considerate individual when you're communicating with someone. And two is make sure that you are not missing out on information, and by extension, not answering the wrong question because you didn't have the full context of whatever it was that was being asked or said.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I've never thought about it, and these are such good points. And we might, as you said, do it unconsciously because this is how we usually actively listen to someone.
We're excited to give the answers. That's what we're there for. But wait, it's worth the wait.
And sorry, one last question from my side. In terms of motivation, so our survey showed that motivation is one of the core abilities that the hiring managers are looking for when they are assessing a candidate. So do you have any advice here for the hiring managers? Like, how can you tell if a person is motivated or not?
Well, I'm going to give probably what is a controversial answer. And for a lot of people that know about my background, I spent a decade in the compensation management space. And so I'm very passionate about comp and pre-sales comp in general. And one of the things that came out in the last couple of Consensus's workload and comp surveys is that 25% of individual contributors in pre-sales are on individual quota plans, which to me is insane because, well, for a lot of reasons, and this is a long conversation, but the point is that I always used to ask one question in every interview, and that is, how would you prefer to be compensated? I wanted to understand what was their preference. Was it, I'd rather be all salary and no variable? If it was variable, what type of variable would it be? Do you want a bonus plan? Do you want a team-based commission plan? Do you want an individual-based commission plan? Or do you want a hybrid plan? And why? And at Vericent, we were exclusively individual quota. We hired A-type performers who we knew wanted to work their butts off because the more they worked, the more deals they worked, the more money they were going to make. And that worked for us. It worked really well. We were able to manage, equitable deal allocation and all the other challenges around individual quota plans. We were able to manage that at the system. And so we exclusively hired people, or exclusively paid people on individual quota plans. If someone said to me that when I was at Vericent, if someone said to me they only wanted to be on a team-based plan, or they wanted to be on a bonus plan, or they didn't want a variable plan, to me that expressed a lack of confidence in their own ability. And so I knew they were not going to be a good fit. And so I would say motivation, you can argue that motivation isn't necessarily the same thing as, wanting to make tons of money and whatever. But the nice thing about an individual comp plan is you're the master of your own destiny. And so when someone tells me that they want to be in an individual plan, that tells me they are someone that will take initiative, that I'm not going to have to push to do well. They've got that drive themselves to do it on their own. So that, it's probably a controversial topic, but that's my take on it.
Yeah. Like it links. Sorry,
sorry, John. I just wanted to thank Kerry so much for being so transparent with us.
It's listen, like everything in pre-sales, you got to be honest, even if it's not the best answer to say.
100%. And I think it kind of draws on the accountability as well, which is a big thing as well. So if you feel comfortable feeling accountable and you feel confident in your own abilities, then you're happy for that to be linked directly to compensation as well.
Yeah, and I mean, look, there's obvious concerns. You want to make sure that you believe in the product and the space and the company and in their ability to actually compete effectively. You want to make sure you're going to be able to have opportunities given to you. You're going to be able to work with competent reps. So there's lots of things that also are out there. But at the end of the day, I want people who want to be in charge of their own financial destiny.
Yeah. Good segue for me there. Thank you. So as my final question, talking of sales reps, so I see you have a sales background. Obviously, you've got experience working with the sales side and also on the pre-sales side. Again, going back to the survey, I think the second most rated skill or ability from managers is the ability to work effectively with account executives or in account teams. So from your perspective, what do you think enables people, what skills or abilities enables individuals to either learn or naturally be able to work well with sales execs?
Well, it's a really great question. And it's something I do a lot of coaching on with my SEs when I'm doing demo coaching, because after the coaching is done on platform, we do a one-on-one coaching call and we dig into stuff. And a lot of the stuff, there's a whole section on my demo scorecard around team prep, right? And a lot of that is around the alignment between the rep and the SE. And it's very obvious when I'm watching a demo where that alignment has not taken place. Either there hasn't been adequate prep, there hasn't been adequate discovery, the sales rep is totally on a different page with the SE. They're interjecting during the demo when they shouldn't be and repeating things, or they're asking the SE to present stuff they haven't talked to them about beforehand, or their sales deck says something that is totally the opposite of what the SE was prepared to show in the demo, things like that. Lots of pitfalls. So it's very obvious where there's a disconnect. And a lot of the challenge I hear from the SEs is a reticence to push back on the AEs to hold them accountable for doing the right thing. You never hear about account execs not holding their SEs accountable. Yeah. Right? You got to be prepared for the demo. You got to be able to ready to show this. You got to be able to answer this. You got to be able to respond to this RFP quickly. I need this. But you do unfortunately hear a lot of challenges going the other way. And I think that's a real fundamental problem, because the most effective sales organizations are ones where sales and pre-sales are a true partnership. And if anything, they should be equals. I was really fortunate growing up at Vericent in sort of my software life, where pre-sales, if anything, was above sales, in that we were looked upon as the secret sauce and the only reason why deals closed or didn't. And so our opinions were more important in almost every case than the sales reps. And so we were true partners throughout the entire sales cycle. I even did things like talking about pricing strategy and negotiations after the demos and all the product proofs were done. But too many SEs, unfortunately, are really reticent about pushing back on the account execs, because they feel they're either too junior, or they're going to get into a situation where that account exec is not going to want them on their deals anymore, or they're going to get in trouble from their manager or something else. And a lot of those concerns are usually not real. But one of the things I typically coach them on is how to communicate more effectively with the account execs. And the one thing I tell them over all others is, like when you're doing a demo or discovery, make it about the prospect. Do the same thing when you're talking to your account exec. Make it about them. And the one point that tends to be most effective is to say, look, here's how I feel I'm not able to be as effective in supporting you as I would like to be. If you were to do X, Y, and Z, I would be much better, and we would both have a better chance at closing this deal. Yeah. And so by making it about the account exec, and in most cases, sales reps are financially motivated, right? When you say you and we are going to have a better chance of closing this deal and hitting our number if we're doing X, Y, and Z, that tends to resonate better with sales reps than saying, you're not doing this, or I need you to do this, right? Make it about them, give them a reason why they're going to benefit, in order to make them convinced on why they should change their behavior for the better.
Yeah, 100%. And I really like the way that you've highlighted the fact that every sales exec effectively will hold people to account and will push. And so that framing, I think if you're in pre-sales, it makes it feel fair that you're doing the same the other way around. And I suppose also that people in pre-sales can frame it that way to an account exec as well, in the sense of saying, naturally you will hold me to account on things. You have your expertise. I've got my over expertise. I feel that I can support you better, as you said, and then you go through that framework itself. And it's a really good way of putting it. Makes total sense.
Cool. Yeah, well said.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Kerry, for your time and all these insightful answers that you offered us. And we look forward to catching up next time. We are going to share with you the report that we are going to have.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Kerry.
Bye.
Yes.